Dan Stewart is Times International editor, and Richard and I thought because Dan, in the earlier conversation, the mere mention of the word Brexit produced little ripples of laughter in the audience.
Groaning.
You and I have to check in every 15 minutes because the story changes. Where are we today in the saga?
Well, it's impossible to keep track of, really. If you stop paying attention for 30 seconds, something else breaks, something else on the news. Today, there has been a bit of a pause, really. Yesterday, Parliament sort of told Boris Johnson that they would, in theory, support the Brexit bill that he negotiated with the EU, but they want more time to think about it. So now, the ball is in the EU's court. They have to decide what kind of extension they're going to give. It's now looking no longer possible that his vaunted promise, do or die, to get the UK out of the EU by October the 31st just doesn't look possible anymore. So now Donald Tusk, head of the European Council, is polling the 27 other members of the EU, leaders of the EU, to see if they will approve another extension for Brexit, the third extension. For how long that is depends on what happens next. It could be a short extension, it could be a long extension through to January next year. So that's what we're waiting for at the moment.
And Dan, you produced one of my favorite covers of the last year or so, which was, I think that it was art by a British cartoonist of a double-decker bus with essentially all the players in Brexit.
That's right.
Is that it?
I've got a copy of it just here behind me.
This is not a paid advertisement. But the line on that cover was what was it? How Britain went bonkers, or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. We got John. Oh, sorry, go on.
Well, I mean, I guess my question is, we all recognize it's bonkers now. What happens? Assuming Johnson gets his deal, is it still bonkers? I mean, how does it play out, even assuming some element of clarity in the coming days?
Well, I think there is a bit of a misperception that if this deal gets through Parliament next week or next month, that is sort of the end of Brexit. But actually, it's really just the beginning. This is the withdrawal agreement sets out some of the tease up some of the customs relationships and tariffs, but next comes the negotiations on the future trading relationship, which is going to be a much more complicated relationship. So they're actually going to be going back to Brexit negotiations next year. I just had an interview with Ian McEwan, the novelist, who told me confidently that he thinks he's going to be talking about Brexit for the rest of his life. He just wrote a novel on it. I don't think Britain is going to get any less bonkers, frankly. We are probably headed for a general election, which may give some clarity to, it may give Boris Johnson a bigger majority, in which case he would be able to perhaps take a firmer line on those negotiations. But there is also a possibility that the whole thing collapses again at the end of next year. And I think, further down the road, you're going to see the impact that this is going to have on the rest of the UK. I mean, something that I think is a big concern is what happens. Scotland, for example, voted to stay inside the EU. If they are going to be outside, they're going to have a better argument for another vote on Scottish independence. And those are the kinds of questions that they're going to come up, I think, a little bit further down the road.
The Johnson deal effectively draws a sort of dividing line between with Ireland, right? With the island of Ireland. So what are the are there consequences we might not see? I mean, that's one of the little understood, hard to understand aspects of this negotiation that has always seemed to me might have enormous consequences beyond what we can see right in front of us.
Right, absolutely. I mean, the first withdrawal bill was sort of got stuck over how to draw a line between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so how Johnson has sort of solved that, it's simplifying this necessarily because it does get quite complicated, is that there is going to be a customs line between the UK and the island of Ireland, as you said. It's a little bit complicated because it's sort of going to be Schrodinger's province, if you like, because it's going to be both part of the UK and part of the EU. No one's quite sure how that works in practice yet. But I think, yeah, symbolically, there is going to be a dividing line. It is going to seem to people who are unionists within Northern Ireland that they are attached to the Republic rather than attached to the United Kingdom. Looking further down the line, the question of Irish reunification, which I think, you ask Irish people, I think I interviewed Leo Varadkar, the Taoiseach, a couple of years ago for Time, and I raised the question of him, did he think that Brexit would be the sort of thing that might lead to Irish reunification? And he said, oh, no, I think, the relationship that we have is really good. Northern Ireland is thriving in the Good Friday Agreement. This was before any of the sort of debates over what was going to happen with Brexit. And I think, but now it's something that people are really trying to start to take seriously. The demographics of Northern Ireland hold that Catholics are going to be a majority there. People who might want to favour a sort of nationalist reunification with the Republic are only going to grow, and the numbers are going to be in the favour of those who would be against the Union. I think if there is the perception that there is a closer link to the Republic, if the trade relationship changes between the Northern Ireland and the UK, so that the Republic starts doing more trade with Northern Ireland, then the argument becomes much more in favour of reunification. And of course, that unleashes all kinds of energies in the north with sectarian violence, the kind of thing that we thought we might have put behind us at the end of the 1990s. I think, there's a lot of unanswered questions there about what happens when that becomes a reality again. It probably won't happen overnight, but it's certainly something that people are talking about now.
I get to ask Dan questions every day for a living, so if others in the room want to talk the politics or realities of Brexit, I'm sure Dan would be happy to take a question, including how this all ends. Anybody?
I'll ask one, Dan. In your discussions with business leaders, whether British or otherwise, does this agreement, or at least the pathway to the beginning of the process, reassure companies that investing in the UK is now more realistic, or do you think that we're going to remain in this period of suspended animation in terms of commitment to investment in the UK in particular?
That's a really good question. I mean, the business leaders that I've spoken to have the biggest issue for them has been the uncertainty. So I think the fact that Boris Johnson's withdrawal agreement now looks as if, a week ago, we were all talking about a potential no-deal Brexit. We were talking about there's no way that he's going to seal a deal with the EU. And, 7 days on, it really does look more like there is going to be some kind of certainty in the future, which I think will probably appeal to businesses. The business leaders that I've spoken to, it's been the uncertainty. It's actually been the threat of a no-deal that I think has been the biggest challenge. Certain people have talked about they've been forced to sign contracts that say, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, this agreement will be null and void, which I think that having that taken off the table will be the biggest reassurance to British businesses. But next year, as we begin, as I said, the process of trade negotiations again, I think that's when business leaders are going to want to have more clarity from the government over what their plan is to build better trading relationships with other people. The way that the withdrawal agreement is structured, it seems like it's further away from Europe and closer to sort of transatlantic relationships. And I think probably given the percentage of trade that's done with the EU currently, that's going to be of quite some concern to business leaders. So they're going to want to see the small print of that future trading agreement as it's negotiated next year.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dan. I think we're right at time. Thumbs up. Thank you.